people were gonna look at me like a monster. I'm not a monster, I'm just an addict. I was so out of my mind, and it was like I was out of character, and I got what I got coming, and I deserve it. I will write a formal apology to her family that they probably don't want to hear, but I will do it anyway. I don't want a circus made out of this. I just want to go to court and get it over with. I don't remember what I did. I just remember when I came through that it had happened, and it was just disgusting.
It was the evening of January 26th, 2017, in Cleveland, Ohio. The sun was already setting, people were heading home from work, and the DeFries family was freaking out, desperately looking for their daughter, who hadn't come home from school. I say from school, but the truth is, Aliana hadn't even made it to school that morning. The school just didn't bother to tell her parents that she was absent. And honestly, that was only the start of a series of awful mistakes. Welcome to Detective Mike's channel. Here, we dive into real-life crimes, uncover dark secrets, and stare the truth right in the face. But before we dive in, I want you to drop in the comments what city you're watching from and what the weather's like where you are. Don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe. We're getting started. That same evening, January 26th, 2017, Cleveland was hit with some alarming news. That day, 14-year-old Aliana DeFries didn't come home from school. For her parents, it was an absolute nightmare. But when they called the school, things got even worse. Aliana hadn't shown up at school at all that day. It turned out the school forgot to notify her family about her absence. By then, she'd already been missing for over 9 hours, and nobody had any clue where she could be. Where was she? And why did she disappear so suddenly? According to her parents, everything happened against her will. Aliana would never have done something like that on her own. She was just not that kind of girl. So, before we get into what actually happened to Aliana that day, let's set the scene a little, because Cleveland itself gives some context. Back in the early 1900s, Cleveland was booming. Its population was growing fast, and between the 1930s and 1950s, the city hit the 1 million mark. That boom happened because Cleveland became a major industrial and commercial hub during America's big manufacturing era. Big car companies were based there, like Peerless, Chandler, and Winton. Back then, huge amounts of money were being poured into the city, and it was considered the 6th largest city in the United States. But by the 1960s, Cleveland's economy started to slide. People were moving out to the suburbs more and more, chasing a better life. Industry was going through a major shakeup, tons of jobs disappeared, and housing discrimination and neighborhood segregation just made everything worse. Violence was on the rise, and the Great Depression had already completely shaken the city's economic foundation. By 2010, Cleveland's population had dropped to about a third of what it had been back in the 1950s, and, well, as you can imagine, that didn't exactly help the city's reputation. By 2015, the city council reported over 12,000 abandoned houses, and in some neighborhoods, Cleveland pretty much looked like a ghost town. Even by 2017, the city, already a sketchy place, still had a dark reputation. Sure, the number of abandoned houses had gone down from that crazy 12,000, but authorities were still reporting more than 5,000 empty homes. These abandoned houses became like real breeding grounds for crime, drugs, violence, assaults, murders. Nobody felt safe living near them. And even if the stats were technically improving, for the people who had even one abandoned house nearby, it was one too many. We're going to circle back to these abandoned houses, and trust me, there's a very important reason for that. But for now, let's focus on Aliana DeFries herself. She was born on June 12, 2002, to her parents Dondi DeFries and Donisha Cooper. This little family started out in Detroit, just across Lake Erie. When Aliana was still a baby, her parents decided to move to Cleveland to build a better future for themselves. Even though their marriage didn't survive the test of time, both parents genuinely tried to make sure their relationship issues didn't affect raising their daughter. Eventually, Aliana lived mostly with her mum, but her dad was always around, being the kind of dad who actually showed up driving her to school, spending fun weekends together, teaching her the right stuff. Despite Tesha and Damon raising their daughter with tons of love and care, over time they noticed that Aliana was starting to fall behind in school. Because of that, her school's East Prep and Village Prep Woodland Hills started to suspect that she might have some kind of learning disability. And, yeah, Aliana did have her own unique challenges, but she never let them stop her from living a full life. She had a happy childhood, surrounded by a loving family, including a younger stepbrother, and, she really seemed like a kid who had it all in her little world. Aliana could honestly be called your typical dreamy, girly girl. Her favourite colour was purple, and even as a teenager, she loved playing with dolls. Her mum remembered that she was always happy to help around the house, stayed kind, cheerful, and genuinely sweet. Since Aliana sometimes needed a little extra support, her parents naturally became more cautious and protective. And honestly, that's totally understandable. Even if it's not a person, as the storyteller once said, "My Nero isn't even human, and I still worry about him." When Aliana turned 14, her parents decided it was time to let her take the bus to school on her own. And really, it seemed like a completely safe choice. The bus stop was right in front of a police station, so they felt confident she'd be fine. Plus, the school knew her daily route and her health situation. The teachers promised that if she ever missed class, they'd call her parents immediately. Unfortunately, that promise wasn't kept, and that's what kicked off the tragic story that unfolded on January 26th, 2017. That day started out like any regular Thursday. Nothing seemed off. Donatia helped her daughter get ready for school. Aliana had an early tutoring session at 7 a.m. After putting on her school uniform, beige pants, and a white shirt, they headed to the nearest bus stop together. At 6:45 a.m., Donatia kissed her daughter goodbye and watched her get on the bus. By the way, the stop was on East 149th Street, just a bit north of Kinsman Avenue. Of course, Donatia and her mum were sure Aliana would be back home after school that day, but that didn't happen. That evening, Donatia and her mom had planned a family dinner, but as the clock ticked past 4 p.m. and Aliana still hadn't come home, worry started to set in. This wasn't like her, she always got home on time. Trying to stay calm, Donatia called the school to see if her daughter was still there. But when someone in the administration answered, she got a shocking reply. Not only was Aliana not at school, she hadn't even shown up that day. That news absolutely floored Donatia. Panicked, she immediately called the police. Since a minor was missing, authorities jumped into action right away. A citywide search was launched, and the first place investigators checked was the bus Aliana had taken from East 149th Street. Luckily, the bus had a security camera. On the footage, you could clearly see her getting on the bus and heading toward East 93rd Street and Kinsman Avenue, where she was supposed to transfer. The good thing was that this stop was in a busy, densely populated area, surrounded by lots of businesses and shops. So the next logical step was to check every nearby surveillance camera. One video shows Aliana crossing the street at 93rd, just like she did every day. At first, it looked like the cameras were tracking her perfectly, but only up to a certain point. After that, the footage stops, and she doesn't appear on the next bus's camera. At that point, the only option left for investigators was to request footage from all the nearby businesses, hoping to piece together any fragments of her route. And this is where Cleveland's tight-knit community really came through. Once people heard about the missing girl, tons of locals jumped in to help. Tips about possible sightings started pouring in. Eventually, a local church, True Gospel Baptist, on East 93rd Street, reported a possible sighting of Aliana, and sure enough, the church cameras had captured her. But here's the really chilling part. She wasn't alone. Even though the footage quality was poor, detectives could see an unknown man walking alongside her. This video was taken just before 7 a.m., so it was already light outside, people were heading to work, and the city was waking up. On top of that, one eyewitness came forward, saying he saw the girl walking with the man along 93rd Street. According to him, they looked pretty calm, almost familiar. The man had his hand on her shoulder. So the witness assumed it was probably her dad walking her to school and didn't think much of it until the next day, when he saw the news about her disappearance. And, of course, if that had really been her father, well, I wouldn't be telling you this story today. The security footage shows the stranger talking to Aliana, and then she takes a step back, like she's trying to pull away. But the man just calmly follows her, puts his hand back on her shoulder, and leads her down Fuller Avenue, a small side street off the main road. This little street, branching off the main road, became the last place where Aliana and Christopher were caught on video. Those blurry frames show the last known location of Aliana while she was still alive. Honestly, it's terrifying to imagine what must have been going through her mind as this stranger dragged her away. We can all speculate about what we might do in a situation like that. Run, scream, fight, but no theory really prepares you for something so sudden and horrifying. And remember, Aliana was just 14 years old, already particularly vulnerable because of her condition. Who was this man, and why did he pull her aside? What were his intentions? Detectives later realized that he had been lurking around the area where he abducted Aliana for hours before the incident. Keep in mind, it was early morning, no one else was on the streets yet. He seemed to be looking for something, or someone. Despite all these terrifying details, the authorities had no clue who this man was, or where Aliana might be. Her parents were left in absolute terror. Hours passed, then days. Blurry images of the suspect circulated across the city, hoping someone would recognize him. Meanwhile, physical searches were carried out along Fuller Avenue, the road the kidnapper had taken Aliana down. Looking at Google Maps and news reports, you can see this street had some trouble spots. Some houses were nice and well kept, others abandoned or completely gone, just empty lots where houses had once stood. Police went door to door, asking neighbours if they'd seen anything suspicious on the day Aliana disappeared. For the vacant houses, they got permission to check inside. And that's when they came across 9412 Fuller Avenue, a run-down, abandoned house with boarded-up windows and rotting beams on the roof. Even though the house was abandoned, it still belonged to a construction company, so the police couldn't just walk in and search it. After 3 long days of waiting, they finally got a search warrant. On January 29th, 2017, not knowing what to expect, officers began searching the house, and tragically, this is where they found Aliana. 3 officers entered, bracing for anything. What immediately caught their attention was that the back door was wide open, like someone had forced it from the outside. There was no electricity in the house, so they relied on flashlights. Almost immediately, the detectives smelled blood, and a trail stretched across the floor, likely from the dining room to the next room. They noticed blood seeping under a closed door. Preparing for the worst, they went inside. Following the trail, they found Aliana. She was lying on the floor in a pool of her own blood. She was dressed only in socks and was dead. All hope vanished instantly. Her identity was quickly confirmed by a forensic dentist using her dental records. Experts determined that she had been dragged and thrown into the room, which explained the bloody trail leading to where she was found. Her bloodied clothes and a school-ready backpack were also recovered. It was clear that Aliana had suffered severe trauma to both her head and body. She had 4 stab wounds on her cheeks and another penetrating wound on her forehead, strong enough to pierce the skull. There was also a deep cut on her neck. Unfortunately, many details of this case are far too gruesome to describe in full. Because of the severity of the injuries, it was impossible to determine exactly which wound caused death. It was likely a combination. However, some wounds showed early signs of healing, meaning she had been alive for a few hours after they were inflicted. A more thorough search of the house revealed the tools the killer used to commit such brutality. On the dining table, officers found a handheld drill, a screwdriver, and a utility knife. It was confirmed that the injuries noted in the autopsy matched these tools. Even worse, DNA was found on her body. This evidence would be key in catching the killer, because all DNA from previous sexual offenders is stored in a database. That's how the authorities were able to identify him. You might think he'd be smarter than that, but after checking the DNA against the registry, it was an exact match. His name was Christopher Whitaker, and, well, you can probably guess that he was already known to the police, and not in a good way. The 43-year-old man from Tennessee had more than one previous conviction, showing a long history of trouble. Back in 1998, he was charged with robbery, grand theft, and assault with serious violence. Despite the severity of these charges, the case was eventually dismissed. Then in 2005, Christopher was accused of sexual assault and aggravated assault on a woman. It all started when he invited her to his home to use the bathroom, then threatened her with scissors, struck her neck, and tried to strangle her before attacking. Fortunately, he was convicted for these crimes, but he only served 4 years. In 2009, he was released and officially registered as a sex offender. In 2012, he was accused again, this time of grand theft, but he didn't serve any additional time and stayed free for the next 5 years until 2017, when he committed yet another crime. With all this information, along with the evidence from the crime scene and surveillance footage, Christopher was arrested on February 2nd, 2017, just 3 days after Aliana's body was found. During questioning, he gave contradictory statements full of excuses, but investigators were able to piece together the events based on the evidence. First, Aliana made it safely to the first bus stop, but that's where Christopher intercepted her before she could reach the second stop. Surveillance footage shows him approaching her near the True Gospel Baptist Church. Aliana clearly sensed danger. She stepped back and tried to leave. But Christopher had been roaming the area for hours, and it was obvious he wasn't going home without his catch. He intimidated her to gain control, then led her across a field to Fuller Avenue, where the abandoned house stood. There's no need to go into the gruesome details of what happened inside. The autopsy report already paints a clear picture. Afterward, he dragged her body further into the house and fled the scene. As for his motive and his so-called excuse, well, it's shocking. He claimed he was extremely high on cocaine to the point where he blacked out and remembered nothing. Sure, blackouts can happen under heavy drug influence, but honestly, it sounds more like the words of a coward trying to dodge responsibility for what he did. After leaving Aliana's body in the abandoned house, he went on with his day like nothing had happened. Later, he even showed up at a local Baptist church to help the pastor, who described his behavior as normal, sometimes even a little calmer than usual. Honestly, how someone can commit such a horrific act and then act completely calm is just mind-blowing. His claim that he blacked out but was totally normal a few hours later? Yeah, that's an obvious lie. During questioning, Christopher also told detectives he couldn't have been the killer because, supposedly, he was working on a construction project in the area. He claimed he was doing drywall work, but he had no alibi, no contract, nothing to back that up. And honestly, trying to picture drywall work combined with a heavy cocaine binge, not exactly a typical combo. He kept changing his story, mixing up facts, and still denied any connection to Aliana's death. This went on for a while, until he finally realized there was no way out. That's when he partially confessed, claiming diminished responsibility due to drugs, saying he blacked out after hitting Aliana. Then he added that he'd never have done something like this while sober.
People will look at me like a monster. I'm not a monster, I'm just an addict. I was so out of my mind, and it was like I was out of character. And I got what I got coming, and I deserve it. I will write a formal apology to her family that they probably don't want to hear, but I will do it anyway. I don't want a circus made out of this. I just want to go to court and get it over with. I don't remember what I did. I just remember when I came through that it had happened, and it was just disgusting.
With all the evidence pointing straight at Christopher as the killer, the outcome of the trial was pretty much predictable. But what happened after the trial is what really made this case stand out. First, let's talk about the verdict. The trial began on February 1st, 2018. Christopher's lawyers knew just how obvious his guilt was, so they didn't even try to deny it. They admitted he committed the crime but argued that drugs had taken away his control and his ability to understand his actions. The prosecutors, however, hit back hard. Assistant District Attorney Mahmoud Allah said, "There's no sign of a drug-induced psychosis or blackout. On the contrary, everything shows he fully understood what he was doing. It was clear from the carefully prepared set of tools he used, and from the surveillance footage showing him prowling the streets for hours, looking for a victim. And if you've ever seen people on meth, you know they're rarely calm, but witnesses described Christopher completely differently. He was cold, composed, and focused. On top of that, the exact placement of Aliana's wounds showed he acted methodically, deliberately trying to kill her. This wasn't a chaotic attack, it was a cruelly planned, calculated murder." During the trial, his lawyers didn't call a single witness, probably because nobody was willing to testify in his defense. Meanwhile, the prosecution had plenty of witnesses ready to speak. Just 2 days after the trial started, the court found Christopher Whitaker guilty on 10 counts, including kidnapping, rape, and the murder of Aliana Diaf. That's when Whitaker's lawyers made one last desperate attempt to save him. In Ohio, the death penalty is still legal, and they tried to avoid it by arguing that his drug addiction and partial confession should lessen the sentence. But after just 6 hours of deliberation, the jury reached a unanimous decision. Whitaker deserved the death penalty. The judge could have reduced it to life in prison, but she sided with the jury. In the end, Christopher Whitaker was sentenced to death, plus an additional 48 years for other crimes, including aggravated robbery, sexual assault, assault with aggravation, obstruction of justice, and desecration of a corpse. For Aliana's family, the verdict was, of course, a relief. They knew the person who had taken their daughter's life would now spend his remaining days behind bars. But no sentence could ever make up for the pain and anger they felt. After the verdict was read, Aliana's mother said, "I'm grateful to the jury for their decision and recommendation, but death, it's too easy a punishment. Alter, for him, I don't believe he feels a single drop of remorse unless he suffers like my daughter did. His apology means nothing to me," she added. Her father shared the same feelings, saying, "When you get to where you're going, you'll get everything you deserve before you even get the gas or the lethal injection. My child didn't stand a chance." During the final phase of the trial, Christopher made an unofficial statement to Aliana's family. He claimed to feel genuine remorse, and even instructed his lawyers not to appeal the sentence. But it's worth noting that his main argument was that he just wanted the case, quote, "not to turn into a circus." In my view, those were empty words, a desperate attempt to paint himself not as a monster, but as someone who supposedly didn't understand his action. Christopher's death sentence was also a measure of relief for his 2005 victim, who, understandably, fully supported the court's decision. She believed that if he had been released, he would never have stopped. Although Whitaker initially instructed his lawyers not to appeal, he later changed his mind and tried to file an appeal in 2022. Fortunately, the Ohio Supreme Court rejected it. Today, Christopher Whitaker remains on death row at the Chillicothe Correctional Institution in Ohio. The loss of Aliana DeFries was felt deeply across the Cleveland community. At her school, classmates created a memorial garden in her honor. Her family, naturally, experienced profound grief and anger. Over time, it became increasingly clear that this tragedy could have been prevented if certain people had simply done their jobs. The school, in particular, faced the harshest criticism, as it had promised Aliana's parents they would call if she didn't show up for class, but on the day she was abducted, they failed to do so. The company that owned the abandoned house also came under fire for not properly securing the property, effectively creating the conditions for the crime. As a result, the school, the company, and the city of Cleveland were all named in a lawsuit for negligence in safeguarding abandoned properties. Aliana's family won the case, receiving a $1 million settlement. For her mother, the ruling offered a measure of relief. After the tragedy, she had stopped working, barely ate or slept, crushed by grief. Governor John Kasich signed a new law requiring schools to call parents within 2 hours of the start of the school day if a student fails to show up without notice. The law, known as the Aliana Alert, went into effect in April 2019. In addition, the family established a non-profit, the Aliana DeFries Let's Make a Change Foundation. It addresses the dangers of abandoned houses, helps children find safe routes to school, and supports the fight against domestic violence in families. Clearly, Aliana is deeply missed by her family, friends, classmates, and everyone who knew her. She truly was a joyful, happy, and open-hearted girl, just walking to school on a sunny morning, as she always did. Her mother describes her as a carefree and kind child, with not a hint of malice. She loved her family dearly, especially her younger brother. If Aliana were alive today, she would be 22. Her family often wonders what her life might have been like, knowing she had a genuine desire to help others. There's no doubt in their minds she would have grown into a bright, kind person, someone who brought warmth and light to everyone around her. But sadly, she never got the chance to experience adulthood. All of that was taken by a monster who traded an entire life for a few minutes of satisfying his twisted desires. The only small comfort is that Christopher's life, too, is now behind bars. As for the abandoned houses scattered across Cleveland, they are slowly disappearing. After numerous appeals to the authorities, the City Council finally approved the demolition of the house at 9412 Fuller Avenue. Videos have surfaced online showing that dreadful home being dismantled brick by brick. Aliana's family can finally find a bit of peace, knowing that the dark walls she saw in her final moments are gone forever. Fortunately, other dangerous properties are now being removed at a similar pace. So, friends, I think that wraps up today's story. Thank you for being here with me. I truly appreciate your support. We'll see each other again very soon in a new video. Until then, take care of yourselves, look out for one another, and, as always, stay safe. Thank you, and goodbye.